Hello, welcome to Reality TV. I'm Raymond Bakari. Today I'm joined by David Siegel, who's a former state representative and Providence City Councilman. He's now running for Congress in the 2nd Congressional District amongst several Democrats hoping to succeed retiring Congressman Jim Langevin. Mr. Siegel, how are you today?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me.
It's great to have you on. My first question is a general question that you probably get asked a lot during the campaign season now. Why do you want to be the next congressperson for CD2?
Thanks for asking. I've been working on a whole slew of important issues over the last 20 years, and I'm fortunate to have gotten to do so. That started, as you said, as a local lawmaker in Providence, and then as a state representative. And for the past 10 years, until I started doing this, I was running a national organization. And what I see is that Rhode Islanders are rightly frustrated because there are innumerable issues that government should have addressed by now, but it has not. And I'm talking about basic bread and butter issues, ensuring an economy that works for everybody, securing genuinely universal access to high quality healthcare, accelerating the transition to a renewable energy economy so that we can protect the environment and also create high road union jobs, and also so that we won't have to deal with gas price based inflation ever again down the line. And people know that the system isn't working because of corporate interests and special interests being an impediment to this kind of progress. But for the last 20 years, I've been able to build the broad coalitions that are necessary in order to help overcome those interests and make real progress that benefits the lives and livelihoods of everyday people. And I think that's the kind of work we need right now, and it's why I'm running for Congress.
Speaking of issues, you do have quite the extensive campaign platform on your website's policy section that highlights a lot of issues you want to focus on if you're elected. One of the topics I want to ask you about is your plans to defend and improve democracy if elected. This could be approached in many ways. How would you be able to accomplish this goal in Congress?
I think so. There are a number of measures that have been moving, at least through the House, many jammed up in the Senate, unfortunately, that I would support. And I think that top of mind for me, I don't want to name, I guess, any one issue above all the others, but there are several important things we need to do. Obviously, ensure broad access to the franchise and that impediments to voting are removed, and public financing of elections. I mean, private money, just even that the candidates like me need to raise private money means that policy gets skewed in particular directions. Then, of course, we have independent expenditures hovering over every one of these races, deciding if they're going to spend this cycle, millions of dollars in support of certain candidates in opposition to other candidates. And this tilts the whole system away from what everyday voters want and need towards the interests of the people who are willing to spend so much money to participate in elections. And we need to fix all of that.
The issue of campaign finance reform is a bipartisan one for sure. Another bipartisan election-related issue that I talk about frequently with the CD2 candidates is the idea of term limits for members of Congress. Where do you stand on term limits for members of Congress?
My worry about term limits is, and this is a standard concern, I think it's like a genuine one, is that if you lose institutional knowledge in the Congress, then you end up with lobbyists and corporate interests having more power than they have today. It's actually an issue of the institutional capacity of Congress is an issue I've worked on a fair amount, and there have been all sorts of measures put in place over the last 30, 40 years, especially accelerated under the Gingrich stewardship of the House, to the language that people use is like the self-lobotomization of Congress, reduce Congress's capacity, and that gets filled by outside interests. And so you pay staff less, you make it a less attractive place for people to work. People look for other opportunities. It makes it easier for K Street, for lobbyists to offer them jobs before they've even left their work as staffers, and that tilts policy in certain directions. You lose institutional knowledge, and those voids get filled by outside interests. And my worry is that term limits could contribute to all of this by meaning you have fewer lawmakers with meaningful expertise. I certainly understand some of the impulse towards it. It's I think a good populist impulse that points people in that direction frequently. And I think I've got a lot of in common with people who look to term limits as a potential solution. But I think we need to deal with money in politics, with the revolving door, and increasing Congress's capacity to do right by everyday people. And term limits wouldn't be the first place that I would start.
Moving on to another policy proposal of yours is protecting the environment. You mentioned on the website that you support the Green New Deal. It's a piece of legislation that has mixed views on it from Americans once the price tag is brought up. Can you explain for those watching why you believe Congress should pass a Green New Deal?
Yeah, I think there's a Green New Deal sort of framework, so it doesn't necessarily mean a single particular policy prescription at this point, but to signal that we need to be making massive investments in shifting towards a renewable energy economy. That means getting more energy generated through renewable sources. It means improving our transmission and our storage infrastructure so we can make use of those renewable sources. And I think that it will surprise nobody why I support such a thing. We're dealing with the catastrophe of climate change. There are all kinds of other respects in which using fossil fuels harms our environment. There are environmental justice issues embedded in all this, of course, that the areas where extraction happens, processing happens, are disproportionately going to be areas where lower income communities and communities of color are based. And we also have a huge opportunity in service of a renewable energy transition. We can create lots of high quality, high road union jobs. So improve our productive capacity and make sure that people are able to make a living while doing so. Another point that is more salient than a couple of years ago is that we are dealing with gas price based inflation right now. A lot of other modes of inflation as well, but one of the drivers is gas prices, and I would say that's largely driven by profiteering by the fossil fuel companies. We can speak about that a bit more down the line, perhaps. But if we were to have transitioned to renewable energy 5 or 10 years ago at scale, then this would not be an issue that would be nearly as impactful and harmful to the budgets and well-being of everyday people.
One thing I want to bring up is the cost of the Green New Deal. It's an interesting conversation that's worthy of an interview of its own, I should say. I get the whole taxing people making $400,000 or more a year and making corporations pay taxes. That, I've heard quite a bit from congressional Democrats and the current presidential administration. But Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez herself said it would cost trillions. The U.S. is already at 30 trillion in debt, and how many people actually make 400 grand or more a year? So I'm just curious, how would this be paid for, since the money would have to come from somewhere?
I think there are lots of potential ways to pay for it. I think at a top level, like, these are investments in our society, in our infrastructure, in our people that we're talking about making. And I think people understand that when we're talking about investing, it means that we'll see returns over time. And some of those will be like direct returns in terms of dollars to the coffers of government through taxes and so on, because economic activity, productive economic activity is expanded. And we're also investing in our people and dealing with, giving people opportunities they would otherwise have, mitigating health impacts that we have to contend with that follow from environmental injustice at the moment. We also need, we're going to have to deal with climate change one way or another. And the best way to deal with it is, upfront, before its full impacts have been felt, rather than doing what we can to remediate things after the fact, once we've, found ourselves in a disastrous situation. And there's plenty of access to funding for it. And one thing that I support that has been presented recently is the idea of a windfall profits tax, where a lot of the impetus for this is the profiteering that we're seeing from those very fossil fuel companies. Profits over the course of the last year or so, corporate profits over the last year or so are up 25%, and that's $700 billion. That's $2,000 for every single person in the United States. And in a world in which we are worried about transitioning to a renewable energy economy, how to pay for it, like, that is one place from which to derive funds. And if we are worried that the economy is too hot right now, demand is too high, and I think that drives a part of inflation, not the bulk of it. But one way of reducing demand in a way that is fair, that does right by working families, middle class, poor families, is to generate revenues and reduce demand by the entities that can most afford it. And that, in this case, is like the biggest corporations in the world that are helping to drive inflation at the expense of everyday people.
One of the points I had mentioned in that last question is also a topic I like to talk about with every CD2 candidate, and that's the topic of the national debt. It's often not spoken about, and future generations are going to have to foot the bill. And in what ways would you attempt to address that issue if elected, of the national debt?
I think it's important to spend wisely. I think that the limiting factor on spending is productive capacity, and that's where you end up with concerns about inflation when you have when there's too much demand given the productive capacity that we have in place given moment. I think over time we need to build a more robust economy that is going to yield returns in terms of tax dollars and otherwise, and that's the best way of addressing the debt. The debt itself can be a concern, but we've gone through a crisis where it's been incredibly important for the government to play an active role in trying to restore our economy. I'm a Keynesian when it comes to these questions. It's important for the government to have taken measures to ensure that we came out of the COVID recession. And without that, it would not have happened. We have a situation now where though the recovery has been absolutely, has been imperfect, we have recovered faster than, as I understand it, every single other major industrialized economy in the world. And had we not taken those measures, we have recent experience that shows what happens during the 08-09 crisis. I was a member of the legislature, and the government didn't do nearly as much to help ensure that the economy was buoyed after the housing crash. And it meant that the Rhode Island economy suffered disproportionately compared to other economies. We had to make really awful cuts to city and town budgets to various services. I fought against those as best I could, but many of them came to pass nonetheless. And then it took years and years for the recovery to manifest. I mean, for the not even just the median person, I want to say, and this might be up by a little bit, but for something like 90% of people, their real income was not back up to the pre-crash income levels until something like 2015, 2016. So it's really important that the government intervened by spending over the course of the last couple of years in order to buoy our economy. Now we need to contend with inflation, but we also have an economy that is very near full employment levels, and that's an extraordinary thing.
Protecting internet rights and civil liberties is another issue you plan to address if elected. This includes ideas like making the internet free and accessible to all, an important topic once you realize how much things went virtual throughout the worst parts of the pandemic. Is this an issue that can be approached by a specific legislation, and how would this work on a national level?
There are a number of different. So my internet platform, broadly speaking, is born from years of work on these issues. So there are a variety of different things we need to do. Some of it is expanded access, so that everybody has access to high quality broadband. Some of it is ensuring that we've got measures in place like net neutrality, which is something I've worked on quite a lot to make sure that the internet service providers are not allowed to prioritize certain content over other content. They might do that because the content creators are paying the money, or because they agree with the politics of certain people and not with the politics of other people. And this is an ongoing threat that we've had to continue to fight against over the course of the last decade. They've mostly been able to hold the line, but we're hoping that there'll be a new regulatory proceeding soon at the FCC to make sure that net neutrality rules are in place moving forward. And there are also questions of just how to make the internet better for people at the layer of the platforms. Like the internet, 20 years ago, when I was your age, was very different. We didn't have these 3 or 4 mega platforms controlling the whole thing and deciding what content people would see and what content they wouldn't see. And so we now see at the platform level a lot of behavior that's really similar to what I was just describing as potentially happening at the internet provider level, the cable level, where you have Google deciding to prioritize certain content and not other content, or Amazon deciding to prioritize certain products and not other products, or Facebook operating based on these really opaque algorithms. And the thing we know fundamentally is that whatever the companies are doing, while the algorithms are opaque, we know that for the most part, they're going to be constructed in a way that prioritizes their private profits and not the well-being of the typical internet users, and not making sure that we have a society in which people are having respectful conversations with one another, but rather on the whole, creating a society that's more commercialized and where content is more polarizing than otherwise would be. And so we need to address that too.
It's certainly an interesting topic to think about because, like I had mentioned in the question, everything is going to become virtual. I mean, we're doing this interview on Zoom. I mean, Zoom might become a norm for a lot of workplaces. Moving on to these next few, I want to do in like a lightning round, shorter form, 1 to 2 word answer kind of questions. Are you for or against statehood for Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico?
For statehood, I mean, I think the people of Puerto Rico should obviously have a voice in the determination, but if they want statehood, they should have it. And I think the people of DC pretty clearly have demonstrated they want it.
Would you vote in favor of or against legislation to add more Supreme Court justices?
I would tend to support it. I think we need meaningful. I mean, to me, that question is. I know you want 1 or 2 word answers, but these are complicated questions. And to
But
me,
it would be a yes or no vote.
it would be a yes or no vote. But I think and there are particular proposals that shapes for different proposals for doing that. In general, I support court reform, and I think that we need to stand for the proposition that like this is a moment when we need real structural reforms of our systems. And so I'd answer yes in spirit. At least I would want to see a specific proposal.
If elected and a bill to ban members of Congress from trading stocks doesn't pass by the time you're sworn in, can you assure that you won't trade stocks or use any loopholes?
Yes.
And this last one for the lightning round section, before I go to my final question, who would you vote for Speaker or House Minority Leader if sworn in January?
I would. It's unclear to me if Nancy Pelosi is running again or not. I would support her in the world in which she is. But I think this might be a cycle where a transition might happen and where she's not vying. And in that case, I would want to understand who's out there.
My final question is a non-political topic I like to ask everyone on the show to keep the tradition, and that is, in your opinion, what do you think Rhode Island is best known for?
The thing that I like most about my experience, what it's best known for, what I like most about it,
whatever in your opinion you think is best known for.
I'm going to answer what I like best about it, what it's best known for to me, and when I talk to others about why it's so great here. I like that that it's like so robust and diverse, and there are so many different people of every sort of background, every profession that you can imagine, and everybody is living right on top of each other, and you have to deal with people as human beings who you might in a different community. Like there was a period when I grew up in the DC area. I went to school in New York. It's here everybody has to deal with everybody else as though they're humans, and actually come to understand what motivates them, what they think about, what their broader communities are like, where they come from, in a way that I don't think happens everywhere. I think in other places it's easier to get away with just staying cloistered and interacting with people who are only like yourself. And so I think that that's in general a great thing for any community to have to experience, to treat other people as full human beings. And I think it also creates these interesting sort of, I don't know, describe them like meta effects, juxtapositions that don't happen everywhere. And I think that's one of the most brilliant things about Rhode Island.
It's absolutely true, and it's one of our many underrated qualities. You don't hear that as much whenever you talk about, you hear someone from outside of Rhode Island. They usually hear the beaches and like, oh, maybe a Family Guy or Buddy Cianci. But what you mentioned is very true, and it's one of the top qualities I think of too when I think of what's Rhode Island best known for. Mr. Siegel, I want to thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure of mine to have you on the show.
Yeah, it's been great to be here. Thanks for this, and thanks for what you're doing. I really appreciate the project.
Thank you. And thank you for watching this episode of Reality TV. If you want to see future episodes as soon as they're posted on this channel, please click the subscribe button down below and the post notification bell icon to the right of it. I'm Raymond Bakari. I'll see you on the next episode.